Hey everybody, I wanted to start this episode out with a quick shout out. Our guest Aaron today has a fundraiser going for a very good cause, Great Strides with the CFF, or Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. It's basically a walk to end CF. With his fundraiser, he will be able to donate more money to the CFF and help them get a cure going. The more money he can make, the more money he can give. So please donate to Aaron's cause. He has a goal of $3,000. Let's get him there. That is what this podcast is all about, and that's what it was made for, to help with these charities. So please check out Aaron's charity. We're going to put the fundraiser in the description box below. Click it and give anything you can, $5, anything. I also want to say another thank you to the patrons on our Patreon, Rachel, our last guest that was on the last episode, and Liddell Gallo. Please check out the Patreon page, check out our GoFundMe. The GoFundMe is going to be primarily for enhancing the podcast. It's going to go towards things like sound foam, new laptops, new audio software, just better and better stuff to make this podcast get better and grow and touch more people's lives. Also, we have Breathe Easy Pod shirts, so please check them out. They're on the Breathe Easy Pod Etsy shop, and they're really comfortable shirts. I promise you, you will be sleeping in these shirts. Without further ado, that's enough of me blabbering. Let's get into Aaron's awesome story. Welcome back to the Breathe Easy podcast. I have another very special guest today. He has a really cool story to tell us about everything he's been going through with CF throughout his entire life. Please, everybody, help me welcome Aaron to the podcast.
Hi, Zach. Thanks for having me. I really am excited to be here today.
Let's give everybody an idea of who you are, what your story is. You're a fellow CFer just like me.
Yes, that's correct. I was diagnosed with CF when I was actually 3 months old, so I was very young. So I've kind of known CF my entire life. We had talked about this a little bit offline, but in the 90s, they really didn't do genetic testing for CF at birth. So, I was discharged from the hospital, wasn't really thriving at home. So my parents brought me to the doctor. I was diagnosed with failure to thrive, and they really didn't know what was wrong with me. I wasn't gaining weight, and I wasn't keeping down any of the milk I was drinking. Just coincidence, my mom told the doctor that I was her salt lick. That's, I guess, her nickname for me at the time. So as you know, and the audience will probably know over time, that people with CF, our skin is very salty because we don't have the right sodium chloride ion channels in our body.
I don't know how I never caught that with myself. I'm pretty salty.
Yeah, and when we sweat, we just produce a lot of salt on our skin. So that kind of prompted the physician to do a test, and sure enough, I had CF. So as you know, they got me on pancreatic enzymes and started to finally gain weight.
So you were on pancreolipase like Zenpep, or were you on Creon?
I'm on Creon now, and I've been on Zenpep in the past. They both work. Earlier in the 90s and the early 2000s, they really didn't have a lot of regulation. So there were a lot of different brands of pancreatic enzymes. Some of the ones I was on, they worked okay, but they didn't work great. I still had a lot of the GI troubles, but they actually got a lot better now that Creon and Zenpep are the only two on the market.
Zenpep actually did a lot better for me because when I first started doing Trikafta, they said, hey, we're going to give you Creon to go with the Trikafta. Maybe it'll help you out a little bit. Creon really jacked my GI. It backed me up so bad, and I'm already somebody that has a bad GI. Adding that to the mix, it really messed me up.
Hey, if it works for you, that's what matters, right? And I think that's a big thing is, part of having chronic illnesses is finding what works for you individually, because we don't really know everything about how the drugs work on individuals.
Can you just take us back to like your early diagnosis and what it was like for you growing up with CF? How did people treat you in your life when you were a child in school? Did you feel different than everybody else, or did you feel like you integrated into society a little easier than some people?
I was very fortunate in the fact that my family didn't treat me differently per se. I had to do breathing treatments twice a day, every day. Did them before school and before bed. Other than that, I didn't feel much different until I was a little bit older. People treated me basically the same. Of course, I had a cough almost every single day when I was a kid, and I produced a lot of mucus that I would cough up. Some people thought it was gross. I just thought it was life. So I didn't personally feel different. I was fortunate in that way, and I tend to fit in. It was a little more difficult when people wanted to go out for food or something and I didn't have my enzymes with me or something of that nature. That
Oh
was more
yeah.
my teen years and my early 20s than it was my childhood because, when you're a kid, your parents kind of take care of a lot of things for you.
And it can be very embarrassing, especially when you first start dating and you want to like go to a nice restaurant or something and your GI starts to flare up. It kind of ruins everything.
Thankfully, by the time I started dating, I was on a pretty consistent regimen with my enzymes. I would say my GI system's probably my most successful treatment.
Oh
So
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
actually pretty good on it now. When I was younger, like early childhood, it wasn't quite as good. But yeah, it can be
So
quite embarrassing to have to take out medication when you're on a first date, even, especially, with dating apps and all that stuff. You're meeting someone for the first time, you
yeah,
take out medications on a date, people just kind of look at you funny. You have to
yeah.
either
You
explain
got
it
these big
or,
horse pills, they're
right,
huge pills.
you either explain why you're doing it, and that's a whole different can of worms that people may or may not be ready for on a first date, or you don't explain it and they just kind of wonder and stare at you for a little bit.
When you break open the CF rabbit hole, you have to go over a lot of things with people that they may not be willing to deal with. And
Correct.
that's the sad part about the whole thing is that CFers are very good people. I mean, the people I met are part of the CF community are just amazingly kind people. They're so different than anybody. It's because they've been through a lot. You meet CFers that are 18, 19 years old and they have the maturity of a 30, 40-year-old because they went through so much in their life.
I think a big part of that is, there's two real mindsets that people can have. And it's, I went through this terrible thing, so other people should too. Or I went through this
Yeah.
terrible thing, so I don't want anyone else to go through it. That's kind of where I'm at, is I don't want anyone else to have to experience the things that I went through, which is a big reason why I did a lot with the CF Foundation, the CFF, and with Great
Yeah.
Strides.
So, what are some of the things that you've done with the CFF?
So annually, we being my family and I do the Great Strides Walk in the Tampa chapter. I don't currently live in Florida, but that's where I grew up. Every year we do that. Now that I'm actually out in the community and I have a job and a paycheck, I will match whatever my donors give me up to a certain amount. As a family, I know we've, over the past 30 plus years, contributed to the CFF over $100,000. I
Wow.
am certain about that because at this
Wow.
point, I'm like, our team is responsible for at least $5,000 annually, and we've been doing it for over 30 years.
That is really awesome. I really hope that everybody listening can give a look into the CFF, actually read through the literature, and learn more about CF after this podcast. It's a really good foundation. They do really great things. Actually,
They
probably one of the best foundations for chronic illnesses in general.
They really do. They're the reason that we have the gene modulator therapy, which has changed the lives of people with CF. You say you're on it, which is wonderful. It's affecting more than half of the people with CF now. Unfortunately, when I was a kid, they weren't out. I think Orkambi was the first one, and that one came out, I believe, in 2012. And
Yeah.
my first transplant was in 2011. So it really came out after I really had a benefit for it.
Now that you bring that up, you say that you had 2 lung transplants and a liver transplant. So can you walk us through each experience and what led to them?
Absolutely. They're two very, very different experiences. First one I had was just a lung transplant. It was bilateral. Everyone with CF has to have a bilateral because we get infections in our lungs, and you don't want the existing infection to affect the new lungs that you get transplanted. So you have to have both of
Yeah.
them replaced. The first one started when I was in high school. So probably my senior year, I was told by my pediatric pulmonologist that my illness was getting to the point where getting hospitalized every 4 to 6 months really wasn't good for me. And my options
Yeah.
were basically have a lobectomy, which they would essentially remove part of my lung, the part that was most infected. So I went
Yeah.
to a surgeon for that. They didn't really feel comfortable doing it at the time, and I just kind of moved on. I went to undergrad, moved away from home, about 3 hours away. Did my first year of undergrad away from home. It was wonderful. I enjoyed it quite a bit, but I also, my illness kept progressing. That summer when I moved home, I started getting worked up for a lung transplant. When I did, we got all my records sent to Tampa General Hospital, which is an amazing hospital. As soon as they got my records, they said, "Why hasn't he been on a list yet?" So apparently I was that bad. I was actually listed on October 1st, 2009. So that was the first time I was listed for transplant.
Yeah.
That experience was much longer than the second one. 10 days into being listed, I actually got a phone call saying that I was ready for a transplant, that they found a match already, which I
Oh,
thought was
wow.
amazing. And then I went in, they started working me up for pre-op, and I get to the hospital. I'm already getting those first medications to go back, and unfortunately, the donor we were unable to use their organs for whatever reason.
Oh.
So I was sent home. It's a big letdown at that point.
Extremely. Yeah, I can imagine. That's like probably the worst news you can get.
Yeah, it wasn't the best news, but I figured, it was only 10 days. I'll get another call in a week or so. I was sorely mistaken, though, because it was another 18 months before I got another phone call.
That's
And they're
terrifying. That whole time you're scared, you're terrified. Obviously, CFers are more used to this type of stuff than other people.
Right.
But I mean, imagine for the average person how scary that is.
I actually thought that they unlisted me for like every time I went to the doctor. Am I still on the list? Because I've heard nothing. My physician, he was like, yeah, you're still there. We haven't taken you off. But the other thing to keep in mind is a lot of times you don't even get listed for an organ unless you're expected to have less than 6 months to a year to live. At that point, I actually moved home from college, moved back in with my parents. I did community college and I was able to go to the local one, but a quite different experience going from a four-year state university to a community college. Not better, not worse, just different. Incorrectly, I assumed that I was, like better than I didn't go into a community college, but a lot of that really didn't matter because I was still able to do my prerequisites for my eventual degree that I got after the transplant. Fast forward to the actual transplant, I got transplanted in June of 2011. At that point, I had finished my associate's degree. I had finished all my prerequisites for my career. I think 60 days, give or take 5. I don't remember the exact number. After my transplant, that June, is when I started my graduate program and my doctorate of pharmacy.
From what I hear, the lung transplants are just so expensive. Insurance doesn't cover all of that, right?
Yeah, thankfully, I was still on my parents' insurance because I was 21. So I was still within the range, which is good. Their insurance covered it, which was wonderful. It's kind of hard to argue that it's not medically necessary. And back then, I think they were a little looser with the actual covering benefits as they needed to be. So that was wonderful that all got covered. The second transplant, obviously, I've had to do with my own personal insurance. The second transplant experience was a little more sudden. I went for a routine procedure. Have you had a bronchoscopy before?
No.
So a bronchoscopy is where they go into your lungs and they can take some tissue or they can take a sputum sample from deep in your lungs to kind of see if there's any bacteria, fungus, anything of that that's growing to make sure that you're not having something. And if you do have something, they know exactly what to treat. So I had that done. I'm not sure if it was a complication of the procedure or what exactly happened afterwards, but I basically crashed. I have a HOMO2 saturation meter. At that point, I was already, satting about 94% at room air beforehand, but I dropped into the high 80s, so I went to the hospital. They admitted me, they put me on antibiotics, they started to try to treat me for it, and then 2 days later, I completely tanked to the point where I was breathing about 40 breaths per minute. I'm not sure if you've experienced that yet, but it's terrifying.
Not yet.
I couldn't feel like I could catch my breath or anything of that nature. This is the hospital where I work as well, so I know the providers. And I told them, listen, you need to intubate me or I don't think I'm going to make it. So they did intubate me. A few days later, I wake up at another hospital that's actually a transplant center. I'm on ECMO, which is basically, it does your heart and your lungs for you because my lungs had just decompensated to that point.
Oh, wow. That is crazy. It's like almost like life support, right?
It was life support. I mean, it is life support at that point. And we had talked about a second transplant at my clinic before that, and they had told me that if I ever get a second lung, I will need liver as well because my liver is not healthy enough to support the healing process and support everything that needs to be supported with a lung transplant. They found a donor, thankfully, who had a good liver and good lungs. I was transplanted actually within 2 weeks of being listed for that time, which is, again, not the norm. I woke up, had a few complications afterwards that I am not going to get into because that would be about a 3-hour podcast. 40 days after I was admitted for the initial complaint, I was discharged. Within 2 new lungs and a liver. We're about 10 or 11 weeks post-transplant now as we're recording this, and I'm feeling amazing. My lungs haven't been this good in about 7 years. I'm ready to start. I mean, I've already started jogging again, which is wonderful. Not very far because I'm still building up my stamina, but it's just amazing to see the difference of where I was 3 months ago to where I am now.
Can you actually use Trikafta with a lung transplant?
You can, because it would help your GI system, it would help your sinuses, it would help, any of the other CF aspects. If you have your native liver, it would help your liver. Unfortunately, my genotype, I don't know it off the top of my head, but is not a qualifier for Trikafta or any of the modulators. So I'm not on it currently. Because my lungs have been replaced, basically at this point, I just have CF-related diabetes and I have to take enzymes. So insulin and enzymes, plus whatever anti-rejection medications I have to take.
Well, that's one of the biggest things that is an issue for me is my pancreas. Started getting pancreatitis when I was about 21, 22 years old. After that, it was like one thing after the other that led me to that point. It was random out of nowhere. I just was an otherwise healthy person. I used to smoke because I had no idea. Yeah, I had no idea I had CF. Right. I was always a cougher. I'd always be clearing my throat and I'd always be coughing. But I used to smoke cigarettes. I used to do all that stuff. And then they found out, oh yeah, he has CF. after that, it was like, yeah, no more of that.
That's crazy.
And that leads me to the next question. How has your life changed post-transplant compared to before? Is it the breathing? Is it just overall not feeling as cruddy as you used to feel?
The breathing for sure. But with transplant, it's kind of a cure, but it's not really a cure. You're trading one set of problems for another,
Yeah.
is the best way to think about it. You're trading not being able to breathe, which most people would agree is not a great problem to have, with, having to take things that suppress your immune system. So you get sick a lot easier.
Yeah.
When you get sick, that increases your risk for rejection, which can damage your new lungs. So it is different. It's better,
Yeah.
but it's still a lot to manage. And people don't necessarily see all it takes to manage your chronic illnesses before or after transplant.
Do they tell you when you get your lung transplant what the rejection rate is for people that get lung transplants?
Lung transplants are, I don't want to say worse, but they have the quickest time to the graft not functioning, and you have to have higher levels of immunosuppression for lung transplants. Ultimately, your organ will reject. The question is when. So if you take your medications like you're supposed to, if you are keeping yourself healthy, if you're following up and noticing when things go wrong and reporting it to your physician, it's a lot faster to catch the rejection when it happens, and you can get treated for it sooner, which can stop it, establish possibly a new baseline, or possibly your lung function can rebound back where it was.
When you DM'd me and you were telling me about the lung transplant, I couldn't stop thinking about the lungs are just such an intricate organ because they do all this moving. Your diaphragm obviously moves a lot of your lungs as well. I just was thinking about like, how does it work when you get somebody, because I know my mom just had a hip replacement done, a full hip replacement, and they cut her leg and they cut all of your muscles, everything to put this new hip in you. I mean, we're talking for a few months, she could not move her leg on her own leg. She had to like pick it up and move it around. My thinking was like, wow, okay, well, if that's like that for a hip, what is it like for somebody's like a lungs to be put in you?
It's a little different because you don't think about breathing, right?
Yeah, that is true.
You just breathe. So it's part of your nervous system that just works. So when you wake up, TV will have you believe that everything's working great and perfect. Oh, look, you can breathe now. Or if you get a heart transplant, everything's great and your blood pressure is normal now. Well, that's obviously not true. It takes months for your body to get used to the new organs. Part of this transplant, which I actually think is a great part of it, is I'm in pulmonary rehab currently, and I'll be in it for the first 3 months after transplant. Part of that is just learning how to breathe again. 3 days a week with pulmonary rehab, I go in and I exercise with a respiratory therapist to help increase my lung function, because when I first came out of the transplant, it was under 50%, and we're looking close to 85% right now, hoping to get back to 100.
Yeah.
Second lung transplants usually don't go as well as first ones do, as far as getting back to 100%. So I may or may not get there, but I'm going to try my hardest to get there.
I think you will. You're doing really well so far. I mean, even to be up to that point right now is incredible to me. Obviously, I don't know all of the ins and outs. The recovery time with you seems to be pretty well. I mean, you just got this thing done pretty much, right? I mean, it's not like it's been years and years, right? It's
only been a couple months that
I mean, that's crazy. That's so crazy to me.
Yep, it's wonderful. I'm, living a whole new life, feeling a little cabin fever because that first 3 months after your transplant, you are so high risk for infection. Right now, I'm sure you've seen the news and you've probably know people who have had the flu or RSV or COVID. Yeah, and it's very scary. So I'm kind of isolating right now inside of my apartment. My parents actually have helped. Thankfully, they're kind of semi-retired, but not really. So they're helping me kind of adapt, and they're going to the grocery store for me and that kind of stuff. That was part of the whole process of the transplant too, was you had to have a caregiver who was willing to help you for the first 3 months afterwards. Yeah. And that's transplant center specific though. So not every center will do that, but I think it really helps with the outcomes.
And you also mentioned, prior to all of this, you were vegetarian, strictly vegetarian diet. And now post-op, you're finding that you have to eat a little bit of meat to kind of get your weight back up, right? Because it's making you lose a lot of weight.
Well, I lost about 25 pounds being in the hospital. And as you know, people with CF, we're generally not very overweight.
Yeah.
It's a struggle for us to put weight on just because of all the digestion issues that we've had and, the increased demand that our body has just from all the extra work it takes just to breathe. If you have your native lungs and you're coughing all the time and your body's always working extra to breathe, it takes a lot of calories for us to gain weight. And when you're in a hospital for a month laying in a bed because you can't move, you lose a lot of weight. So I lost about 25 pounds. I was not overweight. I was normal weight. I've put on probably about 6 or 7 since I got home, which is good because I'm trying to, but I'm having to eat a lot of protein, going back to meat, at least temporarily until I get back to my pre-transplant weight.
Peanut butter will be your best friend too if you're not allergic to peanuts.
No, I'm not.
Peanut butter will make you a fatty. The Trikafta has really made me into a fatty, man. I used to be pretty slim gym, especially when I was in high school, I only weighed like 119 pounds, which for my height is actually pretty skinny. They were like, dude, you're like anorexic pretty much. Now, after the Trikafta, which has been a side effect for a lot of people, if you want to call it that, I guess a lot of people actually enjoy it. The fact that it gives them a little more weight. More weight usually means more energy for most people out there.
Right.
I've definitely gained a lot of weight since Trikafta.
Like I said, I'm not on any of the modulators, so it is still pretty difficult for me to gain weight. I guess that's good that you're able to gain weight pretty easily, but it's also kind of a double-edged sword because you spent most of your childhood not having to worry about it.
Yeah,
Now that
yeah,
you're
it
on the
is.
medication, you're like, oh, well, now I might have to watch what I eat.
Now I have to exercise, dang it.
Well,
Before
that's
I
gonna
used to
be
have an excuse.
exactly. That's gonna be good for you though.
That's
Keep the
true.
lungs healthy as long as you can, right?
Yeah, that is true. My thing was always finding the energy to work out. I always noticed, even before I was diagnosed with CF, that I just struggled so much in the gym. I would feel like I had no energy. Like I had a buddy that I used to go and we used to lift weights and stuff and go to the gym. My energy levels were just crap. His endurance was like way more than my endurance. I definitely noticed that forever, actually. Probably even when I was in elementary school doing PE with all the other kids.
So yeah, the biggest difference with for the transplant and after is like you said, the energy. I never was able to run a mile before my first transplant, not in my entire
Yeah.
life. So the first time I ran a mile, I was 21 years old. It was 6 months after my transplant, and I jogged a full mile without stopping.
Oh,
It's
wow.
something I had never done in my life before.
And you caught the runner's
And
high.
to me, it wasn't even just that. It was accomplishing something that I never thought I could accomplish. That
That would be
was
such an incredible feeling.
yeah, it was a huge difference. And with this next transplant, I said, why stop at a mile? Let's go for 5K. So that's kind of what my new goal is hopefully within the first year I can get a 5K under my belt.
That would be so awesome. What are some of the biggest misunderstandings about living with CF and chronic illness?
I think people just don't realize what CF really means and what CF really does to a person. You
Yeah.
mentioned the not having energy. You may or may not be aware that liver disease is actually the second leading cause of mortality in people with CF. I didn't drink. I've never been drunk in my life, actually, which is crazy for a lot of people to hear at 34. I don't drink, can't now because of the transplants and the interacts with the medications and just to be safe. But even beforehand, I wanted to keep my liver healthy. So you go out, you're at a bar with some friends or you're out to dinner with some friends and they're all drinking and people buy you a shot and you're like, no, thank you. It's kind of offends people.
They look at you like buzzkill, and you're like, dude, I'm gonna die. Like,
Right.
you're like, give me a break, dude.
Right. But the other parts about living with CF is every day you have to put in effort to just stay healthy. And
Yeah.
that's different than most people. Like most people take their health for granted. People with chronic illnesses really can't, or if they do, they don't generally have great outcomes. When I was born, I think the life expectancy for CF was 29 or 30. I mean, think about that. I'm 34 now. I've already lived past my life expectancy, which is
Yeah.
crazy. And you're 27, so if you were born when I was born, you'd be creeping up on it. It's just a struggle in the morning because you have to wake up early, do breathing treatments. For post-transplant, I do my spirometry every morning before I go to work to make sure that my lungs aren't getting worse without me noticing. It's just extra effort, and it's once a day, twice a day. You have to get better sleep because you're tired more with chronic illnesses. So it's a struggle in that regard that it's just more work on top of already having to work.
I really, really love your mindset on this whole thing because, even me as a late diagnosis, right? Somebody like you who's lived with it forever and I mean, that's just crushing news to get when you're young or when you're growing up to know that, like you said, that life expectancy was 20 something, 30 something years old, right? Other issue with CF is that mental aspect of everything. Depression and anxiety can be just as much of a killer in CF as the other things can be because they lead to a lack of motivation, which can lead to just laying down and dying, essentially. It's the same thing for every chronic illness, don't get me wrong. It's not just CF. The mental aspect plays such a big role, at least I believe, in progressing or actually getting better.
You couldn't have said it any better. It's all mentality. Obviously, you have to have the right team and you have to have the right medications and all that. The entire time I was in the hospital for this last transplant, even before I knew I was going to get the transplant, before I was listed, before I was worked up for it, my mentality was, I'm here to get better. You're
I
not
think,
there to get worse. You're there to get better. And
yeah.
people who have chronic illnesses that have had it their whole lives, like myself and other people with CF, it's this mentality that you have to grow up with that, yes, I can do this, because if you don't, like you said, you just lay down and die.
I brought this up on my last episode with my last guest, but I'm going to bring it up again because I love it so much. I saw this, there was a Super Bowl ad that came out for the Super Bowl, and it was for people with Down syndrome. And it was just such a good ad because basically it was a girl with Down syndrome. She was basically saying, I can't do any of the stuff that normal people do because you don't allow me to do the normal stuff. You keep limiting me and putting me in a box like, hey, she's a girl with Down syndrome. She can't go have fun. She can't party. She can't have friends. She can't do any of the normal stuff. In reality, they want that. They want to go out and do the normal stuff, but people box them up.
That's an interesting point. For sure, we all want to do what everyone else can do. And for the most part, we're lucky because we look normal, right?
Yeah,
We
that's
don't
true.
have a physical appearing disability, but we do have a physical disability in the fact that, breathing's harder, running's harder, exercising's harder. We have less energy. We can't necessarily do everything else that people can do as easily anyway. We want to work as hard.
I think putting ourselves in a box, I get what you're saying on top of that because there is limitations. There is limitations. I do want to make that clear. People with chronic illnesses and disabilities do have limitations in some aspects, but allow them to figure that out and try things. I think, like you said with us, like with alcohol, like you don't want to just shatter your liver because people are trying to pressure you to drink. Your limitations as well. I guess it's the fact that other people try to limit people with chronic illnesses. And to me, that's wrong because I think as people, we should all still be able to choose what we'd like to do.
Right, I agree with that completely.
So I want to get into your position you're a clinical pharmacist, right?
Correct. I work at a hospital. I work in the emergency room and in the ICU.
So as a clinical pharmacist and as somebody with CF as well, how has your medical background influenced your patient experience?
You may or may not have experienced this being relatively new to your diagnosis. When you're in healthcare your whole life, you see people who genuinely care, who work in healthcare, and you see people who are there for a paycheck.
Yeah. No, I've definitely experienced that.
Yeah, I try to treat every patient that I have as if they were a direct family member or myself. Like, I
Yeah.
really want to do what's best for that person. Regardless of anything else, I expect them to get better, but I need to help them. I need to help them. The physician needs to help them. The nurses need to help them. The respiratory therapists need to help them. The patient care techs need to help them. Dietary, nutrition. Everyone in the hospital is a team, and we all need to put our best foot forward to help patients. So
Yeah.
having CF, I try to treat everybody as if it were me in that bed.
I think people with chronic illnesses are some of the best medical staff that you can have around. I mean, they're just, like you said, they have an extra bit of caring to them because they understand what it's like, And even people who are caregivers, their families are sick. I go over this a lot. If you don't advocate for yourself, nobody cares unless you make them care. And there are some doctors out there that do care, like you said, there's people out there that do actually care, but you need to learn how to advocate for yourself no matter what. When my mom got her hip surgery, I had to go off on a couple of nurses because I felt like they weren't giving her the right treatment, And I don't want to be what they would call a Karen or whatever now, because they
Right.
kind of put people down that it seems like everybody gets lumped into that Karen group nowadays that you're a Karen if you advocate for yourself. And it's like, that's not right either because there has to be a middle ground, right? If you're freaking out on people at Del Taco, you're a Karen, right? But if you're at the doctor
Right.
and you're trying to advocate for yourself, you're not a Karen. You're somebody who's concerned about your health or somebody else's health.
Right. And I have found too that the best way to handle those situations, because I've been in more than I can count, more than I could care to even recall, is to try to maintain your cool, be as respectful as possible, but sternly say what you're trying to get across. Like, I am not getting the care that I need. Let's come up with a solution together.
Yeah,
And
you don't want
taking
to start
that,
telling the lady to fuck off and
right, being a healthcare practitioner has also affected the way I am as a patient because I've seen the patients that freak out and I've seen the ones that get mad at the staff. They generally, for better or worse, don't always get the same respect as the patients who are calm and collected and try to come up with a plan together. So keeping a calm head, and for anyone listening, is the best way you can advocate for yourself, is calmly and possibly forcefully, but calmly and respectfully
Yeah.
get across your point that this is a medical necessity, insurance company. I need it for this reason. What do I need to get? What documentation do you need to have? What needs to be done so that I can get the medications or the procedures that I need done?
Your statement about these people don't get the same care or a lot of the time get maybe lesser care. You have to realize, everybody, as much as people try to say, because it's business is business and people will tell you up and down the street, you're not going to get treated differently. Every customer is valued the same. Everybody is treated the same. We're all people, everybody. There has to be a point where you have common sense and realize that if you go in cussing people out, they're not going to want to deal with you, okay? And if you have a very limited, especially when you have CF and it's a rare illness, you have a care team usually assigned to you, and you don't want to these people off. You these people off, you might not get the best care in the world.
It's not a conscious thought that the care would be worse. Nobody says that I want to treat this patient worse, but
Yeah.
it's more of a I'm going to
It's
go
like,
above and
oh
beyond for
man.
this patient because I really care for them and I respect them and they're nice and they're a
Yeah.
pleasure. I enjoy being around them. That's huge. Being your own advocate is what anyone with a chronic illness has to do. It's a mandate. It's not something that we want to do. I've learned how to navigate insurance companies and talk to the right people, which is a skill no one should have to have, right? But
Yeah.
it's a skill that you develop over the years of getting the short end of the stick, basically.
Yeah, you have to learn your way around the member services and stuff like that. And you have to react accordingly because it's easy when you first get diagnosed with something to kind of overreact and start freaking out. I guess thinking you're the center of the universe because it's happening to you at this moment. But you have to realize that these people see a million of you every day. Not that they don't care about you, but they also have seen it. They know what to do. So overreacting can be your worst enemy in these situations.
I would completely agree. Keeping a level head and being respectful is the best thing you can do for your health. Again, with that, you have to advocate for yourself.
So, as a clinical pharmacist and as a patient, what is something that frustrates you the most in the healthcare system today?
Honestly, insurance, it's something that we all have or we all would like to have. And you would think that if you're ill, it will help. But you have to learn how to navigate the system because not every physician is in your preferred tier. Not every hospital is in your preferred tier. Not every medication is. So you have to jump through the hoop. When I was a kid, there were antibiotics that I had to be on for infections, and it would take a week for the prior authorization to go through. A prior authorization, if you have an acute infection, waiting a week isn't something you can do. You need that medication right then. It's just all the hoops you have to jump through to get the insurance companies to treat yourself as a patient and as a practitioner, as a pharmacist. It's what we have to do to get our patients the right medications, get our patients the right procedures. I really wish there was a better system for health insurance in this country.
When you're a pharmacist, you're the middleman too, because then you have the patient over here that's like upset with you directly, or some of them, maybe the people that don't really know or think about the intricacies of everything, but you're kind of the middleman standing in between them and their meds. It's frustrating to you too, I'm sure, because you're like, it's not me, it's these insurance companies or it's these other people, the doctors that don't get you the prescriptions on time. I've seen people flip out on the pharmacist and I'm like, it's not him. I'm sure sometimes they mess up. It's not them most of the time.
A lot of healthcare is waiting for either someone else to do their job or you having to personally call and go around other people to get to the person you need to talk to. And that takes a lot of effort. There's kind of a shortage of healthcare workers in this country right now after the recent pandemic.
I think healthcare and insurance in general is becoming like one of the biggest topics so far of the new year. Especially with like the Luigi Mangione stuff, people are going crazy with this thing and it's becoming a really big topic, Some people are justifying what he did, which I can't ever justify doing something like that. It is embodying, I guess, the frustration that American people have with their healthcare.
I would agree that it is the embodiment. I think one of the main issues of that whole situation is people are celebrating that man's death. The biggest take home we can have from that is I can't argue that it's right to kill somebody out of cold blood, but don't live your life or run a business in a way that people celebrate when you die.
That's pretty horrible.
The fact that people are celebrating his death speaks volumes about the state of healthcare in this country.
I've never seen anything like it. I mean, there was some pretty horrible people that got killed or died or whatever. And it was like, nobody reacted like this. But this guy, people are like cheering and they're outside of the courtroom with signs saying, "Free Luigi Mangione." It's like, they're not going to free him. He murdered somebody. You can never go and just murder somebody and be a great person. It is crazy that he is getting that. It does speak a lot about the condition that this healthcare system is in now. It is ridiculous.
Right. And on the other side of that coin, one could argue, and this is, I think, where the people who are celebrating his death came from, that United Healthcare was responsible for people's deaths because of the lack of coverage. And I think that's the duality of the situation is one man directly died and other people may have indirectly died because of not necessarily his personal actions, but his company's actions.
There is a time and a place to stand up and do what's right for people. When it comes to being a CEO of a healthcare company, you do have some type of direct responsibility to fix problems.
Right.
Now, again, I want to reiterate, I don't think that that means you deserve to die, but I also don't believe that he was a great guy and he had no power to fix the situation at all. I believe he had some power to fix some of that.
There have been times in my life when I got a bill from a health system for $350,000 because the insurance wasn't processed properly. That was the long and short of it. And it took me about a year to get that fixed. And it wasn't
Yeah.
a year of me just calling once and waiting. It was me calling every month for about a year to get this fixed. The only reason I knew how to do that is because I've had to talk to insurance companies for the past 15 years, my entire adult life, to navigate these ridiculous things that they have. It's not something that anyone should have to do, especially when they're not feeling well. Like, you have to navigate this not when you're healthy and in your best mindset, but when you're acutely sick and trying to get better. And now you have on top of this, oh, by the way, here's a $200,000 procedure that we're not going to cover. Or here's
Yeah.
a $500 medication that we're not going to cover.
Oh yeah, yeah. Linzess has been a real killer for me, and I need it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's super expensive. Most of it's out of pocket. So I actually want to put Kaiser on blast real quick. If you guys don't hear this podcast, I'm gonna tell Aaron to put it out.
Well, I'm not putting anybody on blast, just for the record. But
I'm not actually gonna put him on blast. A weird event that happened to me just recently. For the longest time, I mean, I want to say for the last few months, I had like a $900 tab with Kaiser. I have insurance. I'm covered through my job and everything. I had a $900 tab and I didn't pay any of this tab, right? I called them. I said, what is this? I'm covered and I can't believe how much money you guys are trying to bill me. They were like, yeah, you owe this much money, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, well, what can we do about this? And I can't pay you guys $900 up front. And they were like, well, we can do a payment plan, set up a payment plan, whatever. They set up a payment plan. I don't think I paid even one or two payments on this payment plan. January this year, still around 800 and something dollars that I owed to Kaiser on this bill. I got into a kind of like a spat or whatever with my CF clinic. Like, I didn't freak out on them or anything, but I just didn't feel like I was able to get the care that I needed to get at the moment. I had went through member services a lot about this one particular issue. I'm not going to say what it is. Then I ended up contacting California Medical Healthcare Service. They did an investigation with Kaiser. And fast forward to this month, February, the bill is gone. It disappeared in thin air. I only owe $40. I look at the billing statements to see, did somebody pay my bill for me or what happened? This $900 is just here. There's only one payment on there for $10 in the month of February. I never made a payment this month and the money just poof, gone. I don't know it anymore. Yeah, I'm not even upset about it. I'm not going to say anything about it to Kaiser because I'm like, well, awesome. I don't know anything anymore, but it was just so weird. Like, what happened to that money?
I mean, that's wonderful, and I'm glad that kind of disappeared for you. Other people with CF, the CF Foundation actually does have some patient assistance programs too for anyone who is struggling. So that's a resource that people can attempt to get. Obviously, not everybody gets all the things they need, but I do want to say that you're looking to donate somewhere, CF Foundation's wonderful. Or if you have CF and you're unable to get medications that you need, check in with them. They may be able to help you out and at least reduce the price.
I actually used one of those, the Live Fearlessly Foundation. I don't know if you're familiar with them. Are you familiar with the Live Fearlessly Foundation?
I actually have not been familiar with that one, not yet.
I encourage everybody listening to look into the Live Fearlessly Foundation. The creator of the Live Fearlessly Foundation right now, he's actually actively in the process of getting a lung transplant. So
Wonderful.
a double lung. He's starting out on that process right now, but he runs the Live Fearlessly Foundation. They're activity grants. And if you have CF and you want to get involved with some activity, the Live Fearlessly Foundation has graciously given me money. I'm a music guy. I love music. I love instruments. So,
wonderful.
2 years ago or a year ago, they helped supply me with enough money to get an instrument that I really wanted. And they're just awesome people over there. So everybody check them out, please.
I'll have to do that, Zach. That sounds wonderful.
They're awesome. They're so cool. And they also have another podcast called the Beyond the Data podcast. It's a really cool podcast, so check it out. Everybody involved with that podcast is awesome. So how's CF and transplant life impacted your relationships with family, friends, or dating?
I'm very close with my family. We are actually currently living in the same short-term housing apartment complex because as part of the transplant, I had to move closer to the transplant center, and they actually relocated to help with. So we're very, very close as a family. That has been a wonderful part of having CF is the bond that I have with them. But
do you think you're even closer with your family than a lot of people that don't have CF? Like, it might have brought you guys together even more?
Yeah, I think out of both necessity and just the fact that it brings a lot of mutual respect between us.
Yeah.
takes a lot to be a caregiver of someone with a chronic illness, and it takes a lot to have a chronic illness. So the fact that I don't want to say we're amazing at everything, but like we're well enough adjusted.
Yeah.
We all have our quirks, but we're well enough adjusted that there's that mutual respect between us that, yeah, this is hard for all of us. And of course, there's times when we don't get along, but the mutual love and respect is still there. But as far as interpersonal relationships, I have a very close group of friends, and there's not that many of them. Part of that is just who I am, but I think part of that is because I don't have the time or the energy to have a bunch of superficial relationships. It's affected my friendships in that way. Most of my friends I've known since I was a kid. The ones I still talk to. Like, I do games with people that I've known since I was 8, best friend growing up. We've known each other since we were 6. There's just been a few of us, but they're very close. They all care very much. In regards to dating life and things of that nature, it did make it much different, as kind of talked about earlier, those awkward first dates when you take out your pills, but not everyone's ready for a commitment with someone with CF. And I think that is a very hard thing for people to process is, oh, I'm in my 20s. Why do I want to settle down with somebody who's sick or who's not going to live as long as me or something of that nature?
Or can't have kids.
Right. That's another thing that people don't even know. I really wouldn't usually bring it up on a first date, but I'm in my 30s now.
Hey, I can't have kids. Sorry. You might want to turn away.
They usually bring it up. So do you want kids? I'm like, well, that's a loaded question. And especially post-transplant, even if you are one of the few that can, post-transplant, you're on medications that cause birth defects. So you really can't, even with. So it does affect dating quite a bit. My girlfriend right now, she's amazing. She actually was with me through this entire process, which is wonderful. She's the best. She really is. She has been able to not only embrace me for who I am and all that, but she's just wonderful. I'm kind of tongue-tied right now, but I can't say enough good things about her.
Oh, that's awesome. It's kind of a double-edged sword, and I don't think people really think about it like this, but I think too much. I'm an overthinker by nature.
Me too.
The way I think about it is, it's kind of ironic because I think it takes a very rare person to deal with somebody with CF. I have a girlfriend right now and she's amazing, just the best type of person, and they're so rare. I think it's ironic because most people who are willing to be there for somebody with a chronic illness like this are by nature caregivers, right?
Yes.
But sad part is women that are by nature caregivers or nurturers want to have kids, and a lot of CFers can't have kids. So it's a kind of a double-edged sword because it's like they're made so well to be CF partners, but they're also very well equipped to be mothers and want to have kids, a lot of them.
That is very true. I lucked out. My girlfriend actually has a son already, so she does have an 8-year-old boy, and he's great too. It's been very difficult up until her dating, to be completely honest, to find someone who's both a wonderful caregiver, a wonderful person, and that doesn't want to have kids in the previous ones. And in this relationship, it's just been wonderful because she has one and he's a great kid and all three of us get along really well.
How has your perspective on life changed after everything you've been through?
Taking care of yourself is hard, but it's worth it. And tomorrows are never guaranteed. That's the other big thing. Tomorrows are not guaranteed. So every day, and this is kind of my own personal motto, plan like you're going to live forever, but act like you're going to die tomorrow.
Very, very good motto. You've been supporting CF research for over 3 decades, as you told me in our conversation prior to this. What does that advocacy mean for you?
As you mentioned, the CF Foundation is a wonderful foundation. They spearheaded the research into these gene modulators, which other people don't have to go through the things I went through now, which is wonderful. They're in development for medications for helping transplant patients. They, as we mentioned earlier, help patients with CF to afford medications they can't afford. So I just want to make sure other people have as good of a life as they can and that we're able to fund the research to help cure CF. I mean, CF Foundation, they're not going to stop till CF stands for Cure Found.
So how close do you think we are for finding a cure for CF? Because I've been hearing a lot of exciting things in the news lately about the gene therapy, about them going in and gene editing. The prospects are incredible, the stuff that they're planning on doing for just chronic illness in general, but CF is it feels like it's spearheading the whole thing.
I don't know how close we are to an actual cure, because anytime you treat something with a medication, there's side effects, right? It's kind of like I said earlier, it's trading one set of problems for another. Even Trikafta has side effects. I think glaucoma was one of the big ones with that.
I drool a lot. I drool a lot more now. I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden I wake up and half my face is covered in drool. I'm like, what happened?
Right. So, I mean, it's great though. I would much rather trade some drool for not being able to breathe, right?
That's true. I've read that on some of the foundation stuff that there's just about to start clinical testing on some of this gene therapy stuff that they're doing. They're actually targeting the mutations. I mean, they're going to completely edit them and fix them. That's the hope. When they actually do the testing and everything, we'll see how it actually goes. But if all goes well, from the looks of it, from what I've read up on, we're like 10 to 12 years away from actually having something that could be legitimately as close to a contender for a cure as we could ever have imagined.
And that's why I'm supporting the CF Foundation. I mean, that's
Yeah,
just,
exactly.
I
They're
mean,
awesome.
it's huge, and that's just one disease state. If you think about it, that's a proof of concept, and we can apply it to other disease states as well. So it's not just
Yeah.
the CF Foundation that's benefiting here, it's all genetic diseases that have a single amino acid dysfunction.
Outside of your CF, you love cooking, being outdoors, you love gardening. What are the hobbies that play a role in your mental and physical health?
So gardening and cooking for sure. The catch 22 with gardening is I can't do it for a year at this point because
Oh,
of the transplant. There's a lot of fungus in soil that people don't even think about that can affect the new lungs when you have a lot of immunosuppression.
wow. I
So
never even thought about.
so while I was gardening a lot before, I bought a house about 4 or 5 years ago, and I've been gardening ever since. And that was my stress relief. I'd come home from work, I'd water my garden, I'd prune my plants. It was just a nice way to unwind from work and to grow my own food and be able to eat clean, healthy food that just frankly tastes better. And
Yeah.
it's relaxing to just be outside and be away from technology and just listen to the birds chirp while you're picking a fresh tomato and eating it.
Yeah, and the stuff they're putting in the food nowadays is just so crazy. We used to get this artisanal bread that you could buy from the grocery store. It's very yummy because it's soft and thick. I started noticing I would throw a piece of bread outside, right? Just throw a piece out for the birds, out for something. Nothing would eat this freaking bread. Nothing. Not a bird, not a dog, not a coyote. Nothing would eat the bread. Couple that with the idea that it doesn't even mold. The bread doesn't mold. It's so full of preservatives, nothing will eat it. Not even the molds will eat the bread. So
Right.
I have started making my own bread at home. It's cheaper, it's easier. You can get a bread maker and just pour all the stuff in, and it makes the bread fresh.
A big part of it, and you mentioned earlier the vegetarianism. I actually just on a whim during COVID decided to be vegetarian
Yeah.
and try it out, mostly because meat was getting expensive and see if I could do it, it was a personal challenge. And I felt healthier after doing it.
Yeah.
And then I felt even healthier after growing my own food, eating things that were clean and fresh, and I knew where they came from. And I kind of tapered out meat. I didn't go cold turkey. So
Yeah.
I went first by doing no beef or pork, mostly because I felt bad about eating things that were as smart as a dog. Over time, I cut out chicken. Over time, I cut out fish. And, I would still eat shrimp because they're basically just water bugs. And I don't really have
Yeah.
a problem killing bugs. But
Water bugs.
over time, it just kind of became natural. And honestly, you save a lot of money when you're a vegetarian.
You do. You imagine going even for fast food, you get a freaking quesadilla versus like
Yep.
the loaded burrito. You're saving so much more money. It's crazy. Like you said, I wanted to see if I could do it. The girl I'm dating now, she's also vegetarian, so she inspired me to kind of start up on that as well. But it didn't really start out for me as like an animal advocacy thing. Like I didn't really feel like I didn't think about it as much. I still felt bad. And the more I've gone into it, the more I've realized, it is pretty bad how we treat these animals in the captivity and the stuff that they're held in. It's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, that and the other big factor for me was the emissions and how the farming practices were affecting the environment too. So all of that together just compounded, and I was like, I'll give it a shot and see if I can do it.
Yeah.
And sure enough, I did.
My thing was always if they were ever going to stop doing the slaughtering of these animals, I always wondered to myself, how could they actually ever stop? Because there's just so many of them in captivity right now that if you were to say tomorrow, hey, we're going to let all of these things out into the world, it would
Yeah,
destroy the ecosystem completely. They would eat all of the grass and all of the other animals that fed on the grass or fed on anything in the, use these grass areas as home. They would die or they would go extinct just because
yeah,
of the sheer number of the animals in captivity.
yeah, true. I mean, we could just do one big blowout, one last barbecue, and cook all
That's
the
a really
animals at
good
once.
idea. That's a really good idea. I think I'd sign up for it. I'd be like, you know what? I'm doing my part here. We got to
There
do
you
what we got to
go.
do here. What is one thing that you wish more people knew about CF, transplants, or chronic illness in general?
Transplants, for one, I'm a big advocate of those, obviously, because I've had two. People have this notion that if they put I'm an organ donor on their driver's license, that when they pass, they will donate their organs. While that's the intent, it's not always the outcome. A lot of times people's family get involved and say, no, I'm not going to let you take their organs. Don't you steal their organs.
Yeah.
Even though that was the person's wish.
Yeah.
But they never told their family that's what they wanted. So I think a big thing I want to advocate for is having those conversations with your family and your loved ones and just let them know what your thoughts are. The optics of someone going to the news and saying, they stole my daughter's organs, how dare they? Just the thought of that, organ procurement agencies don't want to deal with that. So if a patient's family says no, even after they've deceased, you don't usually get their organs.
And it seems like people just run with this stuff nowadays. Nobody does their own research on anything.
Right.
And when it comes to that type of stuff, it's very, very important you do your research.
And the other thing too is people are like, well, if I'm an organ donor, then the physician isn't going to try as hard because they want my organs. It's like that
Nobody's thinking about that.
No, that physician doesn't care about the person who's on donor list. They care about the patient that they're treating, which is you or your loved one. So
they act like these people are going to take their organs home and like cook them up and eat them or something. Like they have to feed their family,
It's not that doctor's patient that's going to get the organs. It's someone else, possibly hundreds of miles away. The biggest thing I want to say is like organ transplant is a benefit for everybody. It's essentially recycling. If you really want to think of it that way, you're taking something that isn't currently being used and repurposing it for someone who could use it and live decades longer to have a wonderful, wonderful life. In a sense, that person's still alive too, because their tissues are still alive. So that was kind of one thing I took from the last transplant and from this one is, that first donor that I had, he was alive. He or she, I don't actually know, was alive for an additional 13 years before I needed my second transplant because his tissues were still alive inside me.
The craziest part about all of this is the last guest I had my recording with said the same thing as her closing message was to, support organ donation. I believe that very strongly as well.
And have those conversations. That's the best way you can support it. It's an uncomfortable conversation to have, but have it with your family and your loved ones.
Yeah, I have it on my license, and I want everybody that's listening to this in my family or whoever, I have it on my license. My organs are up for donation when I die, so whatever I can give out of my CF body that actually works. Obviously, my lungs aren't going to be optional, or my liver, but anything else that I can give, I will give. Any final thoughts or messages for the CF community or those who might be listening?
Live your best life would probably be my best message to people in the CF community or otherwise. Do what makes you both happy and healthy. The best way for you to live your life is do what you would like to do in a way that promotes health and helps other people. We need to make sure we have kindness to others and make sure that we're helping others because if we don't, then no one else is going to, and kindness is contagious. So just be kind and try to help other people when you can.
Yeah, you know what? All you people out there, I know you're flipping people off on the freeway, so you better be kind because you're going to start a chain reaction. It's going to be karma, Yep. So I just thank you for coming on, Aaron. You've been awesome. It's been so nice to sit and talk with another CF warrior. Actually, I'll call myself a CF warrior, and I'll call you a CF gladiator because I think gladiators are more badass than warriors. They kind of are warriors, but they're a more badass warrior. If you want to shout yourself out or your Instagram or anything, I know you're introverted. You kind of were alluding to the fact you're a little more introverted, right, than extroverted. If you do want to shout it out, you could shout it out, or I could just put the links in the Instagram description or the YouTube description, wherever this goes, just to get you out there and, see how you are. And, I'm sure people are going to be very interested in your story and how you're doing going forward.
Yeah, if anyone has any specific questions or wants to ask me any questions, Zach can put my Instagram link in the video or the podcast. It's at Home Cheffanuga. For anyone listening, I live in Chattanooga and I love to cook, so Home Cheffanuga is on there. Mostly it's just me posting recipes of vegetarian dishes that I cook. Want to make people
really yummy too.
Yeah, I want people to know that you can be vegetarian and have a healthy diet that looks good and doesn't compromise flavor. More so if you just have more questions about CF or anything like that, you can DM me on Instagram.
And I think it's important we all come together. I want all of the people that are on this podcast, I want the community to get behind them and rally behind them. I think it's really important that we are a team here. I want us to be a team. I want us to feel like all together we have a voice. Foundations out there do a pretty good job, but like a little community is always nice to have.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, because we don't always have the face-to-face interactions with each other that people with other disease states are allowed to have, just because of the risk of spreading different bacteria amongst each other.
All right, Aaron, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Zach. I really appreciate you having me on here, and I look forward to hearing this episode and all the future ones.